Today is 3 parts, okay? I got this from Archbishop Thompson that it's okay. I'll let you know when I move from part 1 to part 2 so that you can follow along. Part 1 is going to be a little bit about the readings we just heard. Part 2 is a story about a building. And then part 3 is how to make part 1 concrete in your lives, okay? So part 1, a little bit about the readings. When they asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And he answered, the Lord your God is Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your mind, and with all your soul. Everybody would have been nodding at that. That would have been the typical Jewish answer to that question. But then Jesus takes it one step farther when he adds, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And suddenly the nodding would stop, because the Jewish people really did not make a connection between the love of God and love of neighbor. You had to love God. You treated your neighbor like your neighbor treated you. All right, so you didn't have to love your neighbor unless your neighbor loved you. All right, and so they would suddenly have been thinking, okay, this is something new. And then Jesus says, and these 2 commandments can't be separated. They're one. There's no commandments greater than these because these are 2 that have to go hand in hand. St. John, one of Jesus' closest followers, took it a little bit farther and he said, if you say you love God but don't love your neighbor, you're a liar. All right, so pretty strong words from St. John, that we have to make that connection of love of God with love of neighbor. You can't separate those 2 things out. So that's the end of part 1, just very short. I'm going to tell you how to make that concrete in part 3. Part 2, I want to tell you about a building, all right? Some of you will recognize this building. This building is the old rectory up at the top of the hill right next to the old church, St. Joe Hill Church. And about 5 years ago, it was 2019, I went back and looked at the parish council minutes. We were trying to decide what we were going to do with the building. I'd been here for about 5 years, and we had not used the building at all in those 5 years for anything. And so, why do we keep heating it? Why do we keep cooling it? Why do we keep all the stuff that has to go into taking care of that building? Why are we doing this if we don't need the building? And so we decided, Parish Council, Finance Council, and myself decided, let's look for a tenant for the building. If we can get somebody to take over the upkeep, the maintenance of the building, then it'd give us good reason to keep the building. If not, then we'll have to decide what we're going to do. So that was 2019, probably toward the end of 2019. Well, COVID happened in 2020, and so we could not figure out what we were going to do in the midst of COVID. We just kind of threw it on the back burner. We revisited it about 3 years ago, all right, and finally made the decision, and I announced it from right up here at the top of the steps, that we were going to tear the building down. We really didn't have a use for it, but there's no need to keep insuring a building that we don't need and don't use, and all of that. And so that was my decision. That was the decision of the Parish Council and the Finance Council. About 2 or 3 days after that decision was announced, Marvin Pop came to me and said, Father, I want to talk to you about the building, the rectory. And he said, I know this is going to sound strange, and it did, but he said, God came to me in a vision and kind of told me, I heard God tell me directly that I need to save the rectory. And I always get a little bit leery when someone says that God's telling them something that me, who's in charge of the parish, God's not telling that to me, all right? And so I said, well, Marvin, I said, and don't get me wrong, Marvin is not the type of person that has ever come and said anything like this. He doesn't give himself to what I'd call histrionic, over-exaggerated kind of behaviors or anything. He's a pretty humble man, and I think a pretty holy man. And so I was taking that with kind of a grain of salt, but also trusting that maybe something's going on here. And so I said, well, Marvin, it's going to cost us, because we had looked at it, it's going to cost about $250,000 to fix up that building. And I said, it's going to cost us that much. Well, I'm prepared to write a check, not for $250,000, but I'm prepared to make a donation and all that. And I said, now, let me just back up. In my younger days as a pastor, I would have said, this is just somebody trying to override a decision that's already been made and kind of invoking, I had a talk from God and God told me this. In my younger days, I would have just dismissed it and said, no, we've already made our decision. We're going to take down the building. But I didn't do that. I think it was the Holy Spirit perhaps guiding me, but I didn't do that. And so I said to Marvin, I said, Marvin, if you can raise half the money, then I'll give you a month to do that. If you can raise half the money, then we'll reconsider the decision. A couple things came to my mind. There's a story in Acts of the Apostles where they're trying to figure out what to do with these new Christians. All right, they're still at that point still part of the Jewish people. They're still worshiping in the synagogue and everything, but then having their own worship service on Sunday. And so a group of leading Pharisees decide, what are we going to do about them? And one of them, this is in Acts of the Apostles, I think around chapter 5, maybe 7, somewhere. There's a gentleman named Gamaliel. And Gamaliel says, look, if this is of God, we can't stop it. If it's not of God, it'll die out on its own. And so that's kind of the approach that I thought I'll take. If what Marvin is doing is of God, if God truly is talking to Marvin, I don't want to get in the way of that. All right? But if God's not doing that, it'll die out on its own. He won't be able to raise the money. So I'd asked him to raise half of that $250,000, and within 3 weeks he had. And so I said, well, okay, well, we'll start. I asked Marvin, he might remember this. I asked him, I said, did God tell you why he wants you to save the rectory? He said, no, God didn't. I have no idea why he wants to do that. That vision was complemented by, he was at adoration one day, and the Blessed Mother said to him the same thing, save the rectory. So he's heard it twice in that. And so I'm just kind of wondering what's going on with all that. A few weeks later, he's at church at a Tuesday evening Mass, sitting back here in this section, and Ann Christiani, both of them gave me permission to share their stories and their names. Ann Christiani's sitting up in this section, and he comes to me after Mass. He said, Father, the Blessed Mother told me I need to talk to Ann, talk to this lady. He didn't know who she was. Who is that? And I said, well, that's Ann Christiani. I said, you can talk to her. I said, just don't ask her for money right now. All right. And so Marvin went and talked to Ann and said, Ann, God told me I'm supposed to save the rectory, and now the Blessed Mother told me to talk to you. Do you have any idea why? And she says, well, I think I might. All right. Ann is friends with Mother Olga. You guys, some of you know Mother Olga. She came and spoke here a while back. And so Ann took a picture of the rectory, might have been that picture right there, and just gave it to Mother Olga and said, Mother, they were going to Boston that next week, said, Mother, does this picture mean anything to you? And Mother Olga said, I don't know, but she said, I need to pray about it. So Mother Olga took the picture of our rectory, put it under her pillow that night, you prayed about it, and came back the next day and said, God wants me to see that place. Where is it? And Ann says, well, that's the rectory at St. Joe Hill. And she said to Mother, she said, Mother, would maybe you be interested in having a couple sisters come and live there and work in our community? And Mother Olga says, I might. I don't know. I need to pray about that before we do anything. So that all happened. Then, I don't know, somewhere about week, month, 2 later, we get a call from a lady who's dying, and she said she wants to see a nun. She didn't want to see a priest. She wants to see a nun. So I spent probably the better part of one morning trying to find a nun to come visit this lady. You know how hard it is to find a nun in southern Indiana? I mean, we don't have any sisters. We don't have any sisters working in our deanery. We had I called over to a couple of places over in Louisville, but I couldn't find one. Just so happened that Sister Loretto, who was the diocesan mission office director, was coming down to speak to our Faith Life kids that Sunday. And so I called Sister Loretto and I said, Sister, will you stop and see this woman? She wants to see a nun. And she did that. So Sister Loretto came to my rescue. Advent of that year, that same year, so this would have been about this past Advent, Father Bill Marks up at St. Mary of the Knobs said, do you know any nuns who might want to work in this area? And I said, well, I might. So Father Bill mentioned that. We had somebody looking for a sister. So Mother Olga and her whole group was traveling from Boston to St. Louis for a conference, and they stopped here that December. And they came to Mass, and I got to meet Mother Olga for the first time. And then I just said to her, I said, Mother, is there any chance that you'd be willing to send a couple of women religious to work in our parish? And she says, I think God might, and I told her the whole story that I've just told you. And she said, it seems like maybe God is wanting that. And so all that to say, this past week and a half ago, Mother Olga and I met with Archbishop Thompson, and he's given her permission to send 2 women religious to work in our diocese. That's Mother Olga in the front, the lowest one there. And her community is only 7 or 8 years old. They just got their official approval from Rome as a congregation of sisters. They're called the Daughters of Mary of Nazareth. So all this happened, but we still, we'd raised half the money for that building, but not the other half. At this same time, Ray Weisenbach died. Ray was one of the people Marvin had spoken to, and Ray changed his will so that whatever money was left in his estate at the end of his life would go to the upkeep and care of the old rectory at St. Joe Hill. So that was in his will. Ray died. You can applaud that. You're not applauding Ray's death. You're applauding his generosity. So we don't have that inheritance yet. It's still tied up in all the legal stuff that goes through that. But at some point we will. We have somebody who's going to front the money until that happens, until that comes through. So we're going to get the rectory at no cost, repaired at no cost to all of you, although we may invite you if you want to help furnish it for the sisters to do that. But Archbishop Thompson gave his approval for the sisters to come here, so that's no longer St. Joe Rectory, that's now St. Joseph Convent. The convent that they have in Boston is also St. Joseph Convent. And if all goes well on the repairs and everything, it'll be ready on May 1st, the Feast of St. Joseph. So that's when they'll officially start their ministry here. I think we're going to bring all 10 of them to southern Indiana that week before. We're hoping to do maybe a 2 or 3 day mission with all the sisters, do some activities with our families and all that. We're just now beginning to put all those plans together, and God willing, they'll be brought to completion. Mother Olga is the oldest in the group, and she's in her early to mid-50s, and all the rest of them are young women. And if you look at that picture, they're all smiling. That was one of the things that impressed me most about this community. They're happy women. And getting to know some of them subsequently, they're healthy, holy women as well. So it's going to be a great blessing to our parish. And the greatest blessing of all is when I sat down with Mother Olga to talk about all this, I said, what kind of salaries do you need? She said, Father, we don't take salaries. We don't take salaries. Whatever people give us is what we live on. So they're going to work, and we're not going to. So we're going to budget money to help their community, and we'll have a couple of times a year that we'll have an opportunity for you to help finance their community through contributions. So all that's going to start hopefully if the building gets ready May 1st. So the last part, so that's the end of part 2 of my homily. Part 3, I want to talk a little bit about United Catholic Appeal. The United Catholic Appeal is the archdiocesan collection every year for the work of the larger church, the archdiocese. All right? And for the last several years, the last 6 years, I've not emphasized the United Catholic Appeal other than to say, you got your United Catholic Appeal envelope in the mail. I think how many of you got it in the mail the last couple weeks? Most of you probably did. Do what you can. And that's really all I've said. I'm going to say a little bit more this year. And the reason I did that is we were in the midst of our own capital campaign. And I didn't want to stretch you any farther. But today I want you to stretch a little bit, okay? And you'll hear why. The goal for United Catholic Appeal is $6.3 million. I want to just show you briefly what that goes to. $4.3 million goes to what they call the teaching ministry. That's our retired priest. 40% of that is our retired priest. 30% to seminary education, our future priest. 20% to training teachers and catechists and deacon training. We don't have a deacon in our parish yet. Someday, I hope that we do. 1.1 million goes to what they call shepherding ministry. Youth and young adult ministry gets half of that. our multicultural ministry, our marriage and family life ministries, including ministries to person with disabilities, gets 25% of that. And then $900,000 goes to what they call shepherding ministries. That's our Catholic charities, both in Indianapolis, but also down here in St. Elizabeth Catholic Charities in our own New Albany deanery. And then 12% goes to the Mother Theodore Guerin Academies, which educate people in the center city up in Indianapolis. So I want to talk a little bit about those. The retired priests. We are blessed to have 6 retired priests living and working in the New Albany deanery. And all of them have been here in this church at one time or another helping out. Father Bill Ernst in the upper left there, Father Sonny Day in the center, Father Dan Atkins, who also helps out at Providence High School, Father Steve Bannon, if you were at the Holy Day Mass on Friday night, he presided at the Holy Day Mass Friday night. Father Harry Tolley, a former pastor at St. Joe Hill, and Father Mike Hildebrand on the lower right. We are blessed to have 6 retired priests that help us out. It's been a blessing having Father Ronald, but when Father Ronald is no longer with us, and that will, he won't be with us forever, when he's no longer with us, to have these retired priests is essential for us. Father Bill Ernst shared, I asked him last night at dinner, I said, how much was your salary when you were first ordained? He said, my check when I was first ordained was $66.66 a month. He said, every third month we got $66.67, all right, to even everything out. So priests of his generation didn't have. I'm blessed that since I've been a priest, we've had a 403B that I could contribute to, and we get a retirement. But our retirement is covered by the United Catholic Appeal. So all of those priests cover that. Seminary education. We have 31 or 33 seminarians for our archdiocese. For the first time in at least 30 years, for the first time, we have the potential to have more priests ordained in the next 5 years than we have priests who retire in the next 5 years. It's the first time in 30 years. But it costs money to educate them, all right? And so United Catholic Appeal helps cover the cost of their education. I want to talk a little bit, because one of the things that people say is, all that money goes up to Indianapolis and we never see the benefits down here. I want to tell you that's a myth. It's simply not true. And I want to give you some examples. So building our new church, we had Father Pat Beidelman came down from the Office of Worship and gave 6 different talks. Didn't cost us anything to have him do that. All right, he came down and gave 6 different talks. The Art and Environment Committee looked at the plans for the church every step of the way. And I'll give you a concrete example of how they helped us. Where the Divine Mercy alcove is, that was actually going to be an entrance into the children's liturgy of the Word Chapel. But they said to us, do you really want that entrance to be right off your sanctuary? Because the kids are going to make noise when they're going in and out. Do you want to be able to hear that? And so we went to the architect and said, we don't want to be able to hear that. And so they made the walkway and the entrance on the other side. That's just an example. Because of their expertise, because they've built more churches than we had, they have that ability to see things that we didn't see. So they're helpful in that way. The retired priests, I've already said about that. St. Elizabeth Catholic Charities gets money from United Catholic Appeal. Seminary education, pastoral team and school formation. We have trainings and all that we get to be part of because we're part of the Archdiocesan Church. The Archdiocesan attorney, I should have counted them up. I would bet that we've had to make use of the Archdiocesan attorney at least 7 or 8 times in the last 3 or 4 years. Little things happen. We had a person fall at Mass and filed a suit against us. I never mentioned it to you because we just turned it over to the attorney. He took care of it. So we have that ability. So the diocese has an attorney on retainer so that we don't have to do that as a parish. And so that's another example that they help. Payroll and HR administration, they help with all of those kind of things. And the capital campaign process. Because of what they did in helping us in that, and because of the way we borrow money from the Archdiocesan Bank, the Archdiocesan Deposit and Loan Fund, we were able to pay our church off less than 3 years after we dedicated it. All right, so there's lots of things that help. All that to ask you this. Our goal every year has been around 100,000. I think this year it might be 110,000 for a parish our size. We're no longer a small parish. We're one of the larger parishes in the Archdiocese. And so we need your help. I'd like it for the last several years, we ended up being around 60,000 in collection. I'd like to meet our goal this year. And in order to do that, some of you who have never contributed are going to need to contribute. Some of you who have contributed in the past, I'm just asking you to step it up if you can. So not only because the Archbishop, well, he didn't call me, but somebody from the stewardship office said you need to do better this year. And I said, you're right, we do. So I've upped my pledge. What's the that, so I just encourage you to do that if you're able to do that as well. And that really is a concrete way of showing our love of God and love of neighbor. We can do more as a united church beyond just our parish, united with the Archdiocese, united in the Eucharist, than we can do individually. And in doing that, we show what is really important in our lives, the love of God and the love of our neighbor.